Welcome back. You are listening to Broadscast here on KHTS. So we have Katie Beers on the line. Katie it's funny, I've known Katie through friends for the last couple of years. We've never officially met. We've talked and we share each other's stories. But anyway, so Katie's going to be joining us. She was abducted by a family friend at the age of 9, back in 1992, and she was held captive for 17 days in a 6-foot by 7-foot concrete bunker. I'd rather not editorialize and summarize your story for you, Katie. So welcome to the show. But
welcome, Katie.
Thank you for being here.
Not a problem. Thank you, Kim. It's nice to meet you finally.
I know. One of these days we'll have to meet midway across the country and have a glass of wine together.
Yeah. Sounds wonderful.
So, Katie, tell your story. I don't want to take anything away or add anything to it. Just we always love to hear from you specifically. So tell us what happened when you were 9.
Of course. Well, when I was 9 years old, I was abducted by a pseudo family friend, somebody that had been in my life for 9 years. He was my biological brother's big brother, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And he took advantage of a perfect situation. I was a child that really didn't have supervision. I didn't have any adults really looking out for me in my life. And it was just a perfect scenario for a child predator to swoop in and take advantage. I was held for 17 days in an underground bunker, and within that 6 by 7 foot bunker, there was a smaller coffin-sized box, basically, and that's where I spent 23 plus hours out of the day. Was in this really tiny box. And yeah, I endured physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, you name it. Basically, I endured it.
You know, one of the things that I read was that you left a message for your grandmother that you were being abducted by a man with a knife. Did you leave that message on a voicemail or something like that?
What happened is John Esposito, the man who kidnapped me, he wanted to videotape or record me on a little machine saying, I've been abducted by a man with a knife and oh my God, here he comes. And so I recorded that, and he had left when he asked me to record it. So I'm sitting there, 9 years old, recording it, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to wait a couple seconds and I'm going to say I'm at Big John's house, because that's what we called him. Mm-hmm. Well, he apparently was smarter than me, and he listened to the recording before he went to play it, and he heard me say that, and then he physically assaulted me and made me re-record it. That time it was a little bit more genuine because I was crying hysterically.
Right.
But yeah, so he played that. He was hoping to just play it straight for my ex-godmother, but it ended up being on her machine, which helps FBI and law enforcement in the long run.
Were there interactions with him that kind of red flags before this, or did it just kind of come out of nowhere?
With me personally, absolutely not. And here's why. I really didn't spend very much time with him one-on-one. Mm-hmm. Usually if I was with him, my biological older brother was with us, or really that was the only time that I was ever really with him. But the day that he had, or the weekend that he had kidnapped me, I was visiting my godmother, and my biological mother told my godmother that I could not see John Esposito. Did not tell anybody why. And I found out years later, probably I was 20 years old when I found this out, that the reason why I was told that I wasn't allowed to see John Esposito on that day is because he had sexually abused my biological brother.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
So, yeah, but why Marilyn, my boss, or my biological mother, why she didn't tell my godmother who I was visiting this information, God only knows.
And that's where you were abducted. Was that your godmother's house?
Yes, I was visiting her for a couple days between Christmas and my birthday.
So I would imagine it's got to be hard for you when you hear these horrific other stories about kids that have been abducted for days on end. And what do you feel when you see those stories? I mean, I know that the year that the Ohio story came out and those three young girls, those three women, that it was the same year that your abductor died. They're telling me we have a minute, so I don't want to rush you, but I just, I know that it has to evoke some kind of emotion in you when you see other stories of kids being kidnapped at young ages.
Yeah, I'll say it this way, yes and no. And the reason why is because I feel sadness for the victims, and I'm always constantly praying that they're found, as everybody else is. But through therapy, I've kind of, I guess the best way to describe it is I've distanced myself with my childhood, so I don't let the bad that happened in my childhood, I don't let that overpower my future.
Wow.
So we want to keep you on for the next segment and talk about, why 20 years later you decided to tell your story in your best-selling book. But we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with Katie Beers, KHTS, your hometown station.
Welcome back. If you are just joining us, you're late, but we are still happy you're here. And you are listening to Katie Beers. She is a New York Times bestselling author of Buried Memories. Katie was sharing with us that she was held captive for 17 days when she was 9 years old by a family friend. And we were talking offline about healing. And
so Katie, you were saying that you are able to remove yourself a bit from other stories of abduction and abuse. Is that therapy kind of connected, or because of therapy, is it connected to why you were able to write about it 20 years later, being disconnected?
Absolutely. I mean, part of the years of therapy that I had gone through was not necessarily geared at making me forget what happened to me by any means, but it was geared toward making me be able to accept what happened and being able to deal with what happened. Because it's I was not only abducted, I was also sexually abused and raped by my godmother's husband for 7 years. So there was a lot that happened. I was an emotional wreck. So the main point of therapy was helping me be able to deal with everything.
And so you said that your experience may have saved your life, the experience being kidnapped. How is that?
Yes. I would say that the kidnapping, and media always loves it when I say this, the kidnapping was actually one of the best things that happened to me. Not the act of kidnapping and not what happened while I was kidnapped, but the fact that something had to be done to get me out of the abusive situation that I was in my godmother's home. Every day, daily, I would be sexually abused by her husband, and there was no real way to get out of it. And my biological mother got me out of the household and tried doing that, but then would let me go and visit them. Mm-hmm. So she was getting me out of the household, but wasn't really doing anything.
Right.
So the abduction got me out of not only the abusive situation, but it also got me out of a very neglectful childhood home. I can't tell you really how often I actually lived with my biological mother. I spent a lot of my childhood living between my grandmother and my ex-godmother. Mm-hmm.
So what is, today, I mean, you sound, I mean, I know that it's deceiving sometimes, but you sound strong and healthy and adjusted. What is your message today? I mean, what do you want people to take away from your story?
Regardless of what happens to you, any trauma can be huge if it's not dealt with appropriately. And I just want people to see from my story that you can go through something really traumatic and you can overcome it. You can overpower it. You can recover from it and go on and live a normal life. So often you hear these stories of victims of sex abuse, child abuse, bullying, that because they didn't receive any sort of therapy and they weren't able to process and deal with what happened, they go on and they don't know how to live as adults, or they don't have a meaningful and fulfilling adulthood. And to me, that's a tragedy
Right.
that they can't. And I see this even with my biological half-brother, because he was 16 and a half when I was kidnapped. He should have been removed from our biological mother's home, but he wasn't, because he was, quote-unquote, too old and a lost cause.
Right.
Yeah, and so you're also, very vocal about other. I think that your voice with other situations, like the Duggars, is that how you say it? Duggar?
I don't know.
You have strong opinions about what happened in their house. We only have a minute left, but what are your thoughts on that? Where the son was known to have sexually assaulted, his sisters while they slept.
My standpoint on that case is mainly for the victims. I think it's horrible that the victims were outed before they were ready to come forward, even though the media never said their names. But there were only 4 girls when the abuse was happening, so you can infer who it was.
Right.
And, regardless of what happened in the home, the Duggars dealt with it how they felt was appropriate. And nobody's really to judge whether it was appropriate or not. That's for them in law enforcement to decide. I don't agree with it, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm not in their shoes, but I think that the victims being outed was a tragedy.
Right.
Well, I think, Katie, you chose to take control of your story and to tell it on your terms. And I think that's something that many of us don't get the opportunity to do. So kudos to you. For those people that want to know more about Katie, you can go to katiebeers.com, and you can also read her book, Buried Memories. I don't know how long it was on the New York Times bestseller list, Katie, but you kicked ass on that book. So congratulations to you. And I'm so glad to finally meet you on the phone.
Yes. Thank you, Katie, for joining us, and thank you, and thanks to Tamara Rubin. And let's keep the conversation going at Broadscast Show on Twitter and on our Facebook page. And for a video of this podcast and others, check out Broadscast Show on YouTube. That's it. We'll see you next week.